Good evening. Let's try again. Good evening. I know that few of you are just finding a spot to sit, but we need to get going. I do want to make two announcements. One is that this is the last Young Scientist Roundtable event for the current school year. The next Young Scientist Roundtable is going to be October and November. You have the dates. Those programs could slightly change because I am trying to get a couple other speakers in. So although these two dates are finalized, there could be some changes. So please make sure that you do go to the website to find the update for the program when you come back next September. Number two, at the end today, I do want to make sure that I will need your cooperation because there is a change of guard that is taking place at Young Scientist Roundtable, and I do want to thank the departing members and welcome the new person who is going to be managing this program. So it will take 3 minutes of your time, and I'll appreciate if you will cooperate and at least thank the persons who have helped to run this program for over last 26 years. We have another wonderful speaker tonight. She has been to the Young Scientist Roundtable before. Dr. Joanne Slavin is a professor in the Department of Nutrition and Food Science at the University of Minnesota. She received all her school training, college training, BS, MS, and Ph.D. from University of Wisconsin at Madison. She is also a registered dietitian. She is a prolific researcher. She has presented more than 350 scientific lectures around the world on topics including dietary fiber, carbohydrates, whole grains, protein, and the role of diet in disease prevention. Her research team is currently working in gut health, satiety, and related health outcomes. She is a science communicator for the Institute of Food Technologies. She received a 2013 General Mills Institute of Health and Nutrition Innovation Award. That award is given to an investigator whose scientific contributions advance the understanding of the health benefits of whole grains. She also gave to the Nutrition Society in 2015 a W.O. Atwater Memorial Lecture. She was a member of the 2010 Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee for the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Such a prolific person with a great accomplishment is here with us, and she will talk on the subject of nourishing health, trust your gut. Dr. Slavin.
Thanks. Thanks so much. Can you guys hear me? It's on? All right. It's great to be here, and I got to give you guys a little bit of background on myself. You heard it, kind of the science side, but I actually grew up on a farm in Wisconsin, and I was going to be a gym teacher, which is also science. So ended up becoming a dietitian and getting into research. So hopefully I can inspire all of you that there's a lot of ways to become a scientist and lots of things to do in the nutrition field. All right, I want to talk a little bit about how far it is from science to you. And this is always true in nutrition because we have to tell you what to eat. At the end, I'm a dietitian, and a dietitian is somebody who's trained in science but also trained in the application and the translation of food messages to you to help you pick out foods that will help benefit your health. So what you see on your left side there is all the science, the dietary reference intakes, the RDAs, how much nutrients should you consume, and as you go across there you see the information on the Dietary Guidelines. And I was lucky enough to serve in the 2010 Dietary Guidelines, where we try to look at what are the relationships between what we eat and health, which we know are really important. And then as you move over there, you eventually get to My Plate. And people think, well, you probably get this in school and say, why do they tell us to eat all these different food groups, because if you eat those food groups, you'll get all the nutrients you need. So we have to translate it from science to application. So there's just lots of opportunities for you to do that. This is just an idea of what happened in the 2015 Dietary Guidelines. And if you look, what you see is really a focus on plant-based diets and the importance of dietary fiber and some of the other components in plant-based diets. So this is just a summary of what happened. How did it change from 2010 to 2015, and what kind of messages do we give out on diet? What's a healthy diet? There's really no disagreement that high fiber diets are good for us, and high fiber diets come from a lot of sources. So whole grains, fruits, vegetables, legumes, things like that, important part of your diet. So as your parents are saying, eat your vegetables, eat your fruit, it's important to do it, and you're sitting there thinking, I don't want to do this, they actually care a lot about you, because it's going to keep you healthier as you go on. I just want to mention too, there's some things here that we tell people to eat less of. So, I just told you what to eat more of, so more plant-based diets, but we are concerned about sodium, so we don't want too much of that. Saturated fat and added sugar, the sources of calories, because in nutrition, the biggest issue we have in the US is obesity. So anything we know about relationships with obesity and things that we can do to improve obesity is important for us to do. So, fiber. I've spent really, when I first went to graduate school in Madison and my project was on fiber, they said, well, you can study anything and you're going to go do anything else anyway, so don't worry about it. Fiber's been my base business my whole life, and it's been a really good business because nobody disagrees that it's a marker of a healthy diet. So as we go through here and try to talk about what affects the gut microbiome, nobody will disagree that fiber is good for us, and we want to get people to have more fiber in the diet. The thing that's weird about fiber is that most nutrients we want to get into the body. So vitamins and minerals, they got to get absorbed for you to do, by the time it gets through the stomach and the small intestine, those things get into you to have their good effects. Fiber happens down in the large intestine. So you think, well, what's the large intestine? That's where it's really what's left after digestion and absorption happens. It sits in the large intestine till what happens is you poop. And my husband's here with me, and he says, how many poop jokes are you going to tell? And I'm like, I really tried to limit that because it's kind of taken the easy way. If I show all my poop pictures and I could get you guys excited about poop. But what we're going to talk about tonight, the only way we figure out what happens in the large intestine is to actually look at fecal samples. So obviously, those are the important parameter here is really important, and fiber is an important part of that. So this is what's weird about fiber is what happens when it's in the upper part of the digestive tract. It doesn't get broken down, and it doesn't give us calories like a sugar or a starch would, even though it's a carbohydrate. So that's really different. If you go back, fiber, we've always known it's important forever, but we didn't really have numbers. So in 2002, when the dietary reference intakes came out, they said we have to come up with some numbers, some recommendations. So they came up with recommendations of how much fiber you should eat, and the current recommendation is 14 grams of fiber per 1,000 calories. That translates really into 28 for the average 2,000 calories. So if you look on your nutrition facts panel, every time you buy food, you'll see information on fiber. That's how important it is, and that's why we have a number to define fiber. And that's going to go up from 25 to 28 once the new nutrition facts panel gets on board. All right, we also have health claims, and you think, well, why is that? Because some fibers actually lower cholesterol, so it has additional benefits. So oat fiber, barley, psyllium have benefits. So I just said, you think, well, who cares about fiber? It just is like the leftovers of digestion. I mean, who cares? Well, it has all these other effects by the microbiota or the microflora down in the gut. So I've had some of my friends say it's like a black box. So it sits there, usually you eat something and it takes 1 to 3 days before it comes out the other end. And most of that time it's sitting in this black box, the colon or the gut, where this fermentation is taking place. And you may not think much about it and think, well, who cares about that? Why is it interesting? If you go back to some of the ruminants, cows, sheep, goats, they get a ton of their energy from this fermentation process. So they take really poor food like straw and hay, and they break it down in their colons, in their many digestive tracts that they have, and they get energy from that. So that's one of the benefits of that. But there are other benefits with this fiber we call it fermentation. So it's not digestion. Digestion is you break it down, it gets in. And this fermentation actually happens in the large intestine. So other things that can happen is mineral absorption. So because of this fermentation and changes in pH, more calcium is going to get absorbed with that. And then this idea of beneficial microbes. And most of the time today we're going to talk about that. That people never used to think about that. It's like, most people, if you say, why don't you eat more fiber? They say, it causes gas. It's bad for me. I don't want that. I don't like it. Actually, that gas that's forming has some real benefits. The idea that there's bad bacteria. And as we go through this, we believe that there's a good balance of bacteria that we want in our large intestine, and that we want to consume the foods that actually will help us with that. And then the cells of your intestine need energy. I just said, like, ruminants get all this energy from the breakdown of fiber, and so do you. So when you have fiber sitting there, the cells within your large intestine need energy, and how do they get that? They take fiber and break it down. So you never want to be on a fiber-free diet. If you're sitting there not wanting vegetables on your pizza and your parents say, hey, throw some vegetables on your pizza, they're actually doing your microbes a big favor, because they need that fiber that they're not going to get from the pepperoni. So just thank them for that order. Okay, let's go. I don't know if you guys are seeing this. Okay. The human microbiome, we're a composite of species, eukaryotic, bacterial, and viral, 10 times more microbial cells than human, and what we get in this gut microbes, trillions of organisms, and this is what makes it so difficult to study. If we want to study what's in your if you want to go out and study what's in your microbiome, your microbiota, obviously we have to go in and collect fecal samples and measure that. So that makes it difficult to do. So a lot of work to do. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we already know. And this is the NIH Human Microbiome Project that went for 4 years from 2008 and 2012. And when you start doing this, I want to put in a plug here for big data. Because as you can see, if we're going to look at microbiome, look at bacteria within the colon, there's tons and gazillions of numbers that we have to crunch. So if you like math, you like statistics, it's a huge opportunity. Those are going to be the jobs of the future, people that can take this big data and summarize it and give us useful health information. How does it affect our health? This slide just shows some of the different parts of the body that are affected by microorganisms. And you can think about this in your own daily life, that usually you think that microorganisms are your enemy, right? You want to kill germs. We go out of our way to kill germs. But what we're finding is germs are really our friend, and they're helping us out a lot. So, and these types of studies trying to figure out where these microbes are and which ones do we want to keep versus which ones do we want to get rid of. All right, I want to make sure you're seeing what I'm seeing here. A little bit of how do you get your microbiome and how do you lose it? So I don't know if you guys remember if your mom breastfed you or not, but when you're born, you don't have it, and then you have to develop it. And if anybody here has ever looked at poop samples in a completely breastfed babies, and this is no lie, I kid you not, it's like yellow, sweet cottage cheese. It doesn't even stink. So if you ever need to babysit and you have to change a diaper, ask if it's a breastfed baby, exclusively breastfed, and then volunteer. Whatever you get paid, it'll be worth it. If the baby's on formula, step back and charge twice as much, because it's really going to stink for sure. So this idea of how do we get our microbiome, it's really our early environment that creates our microbiome. And then, we all want a healthy microbiome. It's going to be our habits, our eating habits, things like that, and preventing disease is really important to keep this microbiome. So you can see this process. What happens when we kill our microbiome? So how would we kill it or get rid of it is if you take an antibiotic. So remember, what does an antibiotic do? It kills bad germs for you, so it gets rid of infectious disease. So if it wasn't for antibiotics, we probably wouldn't even have society, really to help prevent and get rid of some horrible diseases, but it also wipes out your microbiota. So in doing that, you need to reestablish that. And we're going to be talking more about that today, different types of foods that reestablish that. That is why we have this. The message really is we don't want to overuse antibiotics because they cause problems with our microbiome that we have to go back in and fix. Okay, so what do these guys do? I already told you some of the things they do. Energy. Like a ruminant, 30% of their energy comes from this fermentation, these short-chain fatty acids that probably have some benefits in and of themselves beyond that. We also produce vitamins by this fermentation. So if somebody takes antibiotics and they have screwed up this fermentation, they are going to need additional vitamin K. Vitamin K actually gets produced there and gets used. So things that you don't even think about, these microbes are definitely your friends. There's a lot of data in the cancer field that this changes in the microbiota can actually affect things that cause cancer or are related to cancer. Calcium absorption. I mentioned some of the fibers that are out there, the inulin fibers, some of the prebiotic fibers. How do they actually become fibers? The health benefit they have is they increase calcium absorption because of this change in pH that's going on in fermentation. And then just this idea that we want to have a healthy microbiome within the colon. Now here's the problem. It's really hard to study, right? Because first of all, how many people want to give me a fecal sample? What did you have for dinner? So if I want to study your microbiome, I need to get a fecal sample from you, and then I got to figure out what kind of diet you've been on to try to relate it to that. So this is this idea of all these relationships together. You and I are very different. Even though we're all humans, we're different ages, different genders, you have different backgrounds. So that's complex. So if I need to do a study, how many people do I need to study? Gazillions. The more the merrier. It's going to help me try to look at these relationships. Then if I go down to the microbiota, we look at different people. They have very different microbiota, right? So I have to measure that. And then diet. Diet is a really hard thing to get a handle on. So you might think of, what did I have for dinner? What do I normally eat? How do we get data on your diet? We typically do a food frequency and look at, do you have any regular patterns, and we can do some associations with that. But all of these things affect our health, and they are all interrelated. Okay, I'm going to talk about some examples of things we do know, and as we go through here, I think I want to point out right away that everything affects your microbiota, not just diet. I'm going to focus on diet, but we know smoking, stress, drugs, antibiotics, all these things also affect it. So it's really a wide open field, and I would absolutely recommend that every area of science right now, this is one of the hottest topics, so getting some expertise is very useful. We're going to talk about probiotics, prebiotics, and symbiotics. You're like, oh, what is that? Probiotics are just bacteria that are actually in food. So you probably thought, bacteria, those are the bad guys, right? I can get away from those guys. Well, you eat bacteria all the time. When you eat things like yogurt, they have bacteria in them, which we consider good bacteria. So foods or dietary supplements that contain live bacteria that you consume that we believe have some health benefits we'll talk about. Prebiotics are actually, you make that stuff in your body, so it's like fiber. Prebiotic fibers are things like readily fermented carbohydrates that get down to your large intestine, and they change your microbiota. So in the prebiotic field, I give you inulin, you take it, and what do I see? More bifidobacteria, more lactobacillus bacteria when I look within your fecal samples. That's considered healthy. So this is the whole idea of prebiotics. You don't eat the bacteria, you just make them in situ or inside. So there's a lot of interest in that field, and then you can combine those, obviously, for symbiosis. Other things we know affect the microbiota, so there's studies on that. Let's see, I'm going to tell you, this is just a very complicated slide, just showing you here's fiber, here's prebiotics, and how they all fit together, and all the things that they actually affect. As I go down this path, I want to tell you that the nice thing about fiber is that we've always accepted fiber as important. We measure it, it's on a label. Prebiotics, even though there's a lot of interest in probiotics, there's much less regulatory expertise and interest on that. So, 10 health effects and benefits of prebiotic fibers. So these are fibers that actually change the microbiota. There are certain fibers that really don't do much. So things like cellulose don't get much fermented. They pretty much go through you like sand. They still increase fecal weight, do some good things, but they don't change the microbiota. So these are some of the things that are actually done, these health effects and benefits of prebiotic fibers. So I guess you can see it a lot better than I can, so I'm going to turn around and read it off there. Increase in bifido and lactobacillus. So we've already talked about that. These are considered good bacteria. Now, the problem, remember, is this is a very complicated environment in the colon, so how much is the right amount? We don't really know that. Short chain fatty acids, we talked about that. That's the energy that gets produced with fermentation that also has health benefits that we know of. Increased calcium absorption, we talked about. Decreased protein fermentation. You're like, what's that all about? Protein is pretty readily digested and absorbed, but when it gets down to the colon and gets fermented, it can cause some kind of nasty stuff that gets happening. So prebiotic fibers tend to decrease that, and you'll see interest in that. Pathogenic bacteria. This is the thing, are you my friend or are you my enemy? Bacteria, and generally we've spent most of our life fighting off the bad guys, not trying to bring in the good guys. So prebiotics decrease some bacteria that we consider more pathogenic. Allergy risk. As we go into these health benefits, is it true or isn't it true? We see a lot more allergies. Some data that prebiotics would have a role in that. Some of these, I'm not going to get into any more details. Leaky gut. I don't know if you think, what the heck is leaky gut? A lot of people have digestive problems, and fibers and prebiotic fibers may be able to help them. Immune function. I just told you, breastfed babies breast milk has a ton of oligosaccharides or these prebiotic fibers. So the best case we have, if we want to look at people that eat a lot of prebiotic fibers, are breastfed babies. We know breastfed babies are healthier, right? So why are they healthier? Well, one thing could be just this fermentation that's going on and the increase in bifido as a possibility. And then just metabolites. These guys are not just sitting there. There's a lot of things that are being formed, and maybe the good stuff isn't them at all. It's other things they make, which makes it a little more difficult to even study. I want to give you a definition of probiotics, because I told you probiotics are actually, you eat bacteria. Most people are like, oh, I don't want to eat that. Let's kill it. It's bad. No, these are good bacteria. So the WHO, the World Health Organization, says live microorganisms that when administered in adequate amounts confer health benefit on the host. So there's your overall definition of what is a probiotic. So, see if this lights up this way. Different probiotic species. They're live microorganisms that can be formulated into different products. So you can eat it as food, like yogurt, put it in as a drug, or it can be in dietary supplements. When you get into this field, people will say, well, how can it be live once you put it into a capsule? And there are people that will argue that even if these are not live, they can have some benefits going forward. So, some of the examples up here that you'll see. And this is just all the different ways you can look at it, but lactobacillus, bifidobacteria, some of the yeast strains, E. coli, and bacillus. And as you go through that, you'd say, I think I just read that these are bad. Aren't these sometimes bad? And this is the issue about balance, that all of these can be friend or they can be enemy. All right, I want to spend a little time on just fermented foods and beverages. I was up in talking to some dietitians up in North Dakota, and there was a woman at the nursing home, and she said the best thing for all the GI problems we have is my homemade sauerkraut. Works better than any fiber. Well, first of all, a sauerkraut's going to have some fiber, but it's also a fermented food. So throughout history, people have believed that fermented foods in and of themselves have some benefits. So usually there's some kind of processing step, and they may not be live because of some heat treatment, so they're not true probiotics, these foods, but sourdough bread, fermented meat, sauerkraut, wine and beer, so it's like, oh good, she's going to give us something we actually want to eat. Vinegar, a lot of interest right now in vinegar, right? I'm sure you've seen people trying to sell you vinegar that has a health benefit. All these fermented foods are thought to have some health benefits, just kind of hard to study in and of themselves. These are other things you may have heard of that are also fermented food sources: acidophilus milk, sour cream, cottage cheese made with active cultures, miso. So if you take soybean and you ferment it, you actually get this miso, which is a fermented soy product, and then tempeh, also a fermented soybean. So there's a lot of, throughout different cultures and different eating, there's lots of examples of fermented eating products. All right, here's just some fermented dairy that you probably we'll get into it. If you get into the yogurt field, you're like, are all Greek yogurts, which of these have probiotics? Any yogurts, the whole areas, you can't be sure that these are actually live cultures that are within it. So, but buttermilk, kefir, some of your examples are up there. Let's see. Are they all probiotics? The issue here is that there's a history of use of these. These are fermented foods, but will they have a health benefit? There's some interesting data. People that eat a ton of yogurt living longer, they also live at high altitude, so it's hard to show this. This will just make you want to scream and go away. So these are some of the proposed health benefits of probiotics. So when people say, what's the mechanism? What's good about probiotics? You don't even have to look at this. You're just like, wow, there's a lot of reasons that probiotics may be healthy for me, but hard to study. So I want to talk about what's known and what's not known in this slide here. We know that certain probiotics are helpful. There's a lot of data out there. People that have diarrhea and digestive issues can actually be improved by taking a probiotic. So there's data about that. But as it says, irritable bowel, a pretty important disease. There's some data that shows that it works. There's no approval for a probiotic in a health claim. I just told you we have a health claim for oat bran lowering cholesterol. There are no health claims allowed for probiotics because FDA doesn't believe there's enough data to have a health claim for that. In general, if you're healthy, all of these probiotics, they've been in the food supply forever, right? So sauerkraut, yogurt, people have eaten them forever. There's not going to be any health detriment, but if you have a diseased gut, maybe they're not such a good idea. So this is why you see some of the concerns. Some of these things are very strain specific. So if you're into the IP or intellectual property, people are patenting these strains and saying this strain, if I own some reason to study it, then I'll try to get some data to show you that it can actually treat a disease. So is it a food or a drug? Or is it a dietary supplement? So as we go down this path, you can see probiotics, prebiotics are going to fit all the way through. You eat it as a food, it's been in the food supply forever, no worries. We don't need to regulate it, right, because it's a food. You put it in a dietary supplement, as long as you don't make claims, you're pretty good, nobody's going to worry. If it's a prebiotic, it's a fiber, so you're good to go in that too. So you can see the regulatory landscape's a bit of a challenge here. Who would benefit most? This is the hard thing. So if people say take probiotics, who would benefit most? There aren't a lot of studies to support us on that. All right, so this is just this idea of how does it affect disease risk, and that's what we're going to end up on. In the end, how does food affect disease? People want to know, if I eat this, will I be healthier? That lady just told me that it's good if I get more vegetables on my pizza because it has fiber. What's the benefit to that? Well, I'd say if you look at fiber, we know that you'll have less heart disease, better gut health, less diabetes if you eat more fiber. So I've got data to prove that to you, so I'm pretty good on that. But all these relationships are very complicated. So people shouldn't expect I eat one food and I'll never get a disease. It's never going to be that easy. So I want to talk about the data we have that would show that changing the microbiome actually has a health benefit. It's going to be good for you. So just a little history here on the microbiome revolution. I can go back to the BC, and there's some quotes here from long ago that all disease begins in the gut. Obviously, right? I eat food, it gets digested and absorbed, and what's not used up gets pooped out, right? So there's a lot of important stuff going on in the gut. There's more immune function in the gut than anywhere else. So nobody disagrees. If the gut's not working, I can't digest and absorb food. It's going to affect my health. That's a pretty obvious thing that's going to happen. So as we go down this, though, this data that you see on here, sorry about this mic, it's just, I should just hold it probably, that'd be easier. The data that really got people excited was this very small study, and the references down below, where they found that obesity was linked to the gut microbiome. So I just told you, health effects of the gut are important, but all of a sudden it was like, hey, it actually is affect obesity. We can make people skinny by changing their gut microbiome. Huge amount of interest. And this is just one study. You'll notice it's a very small number of people, and they actually did show an effect, but there's been tons of studies since then, and they're very inconsistent. So if you're going to take in changes in your microbiome to try to change obesity, I don't think that's going to work very well. I do want to talk a little bit about changes over the life cycle. I told you breastfed babies have really different microbiome, very healthy, and then we see changes over life. So who should take in more fiber? For sure it's good throughout life, but we do see changes throughout life. This is just some studies. I just want to point out the number of studies that are out there and what's the kind of the body of evidence on the importance of the microbiome and changes over time. So this is a study that was published that shows older people have a really different microbiome than younger people in some of these studies. Anybody who has ever worked in a nursing home, what's the number one thing you're using in a nursing home? Laxatives to get things moving. So is the gut really unhealthy in older people? It can be if they're not active and they're not getting enough fiber. Some other studies just looking at how do we do research? This is an example of a study where you go look at two populations that are really different and show that they have different microbiota. So this is just a study looking at children in rural Africa compared to Europe and showing they're really different. And those pie charts are just showing you some of the microbiota that are measured in these studies, and just the color will show you very different. Now you're sitting there, you guys hopefully have good detectors, and you're thinking, yeah, but there's just about everything's different about them, not just their diet. I mean, culture, gender, genetics, everything, so diet may, and so then you're seeing some more recent studies where you take people, you go out to rural Africa and feed them a westernized diet and see what that does to their microbiome, and a lot of times it doesn't do much because their microbiome doesn't change very much. So these studies are continuing, but they tend to be a little bit confusing. Let's see, these are some other studies on observational studies and intervention studies. And I just want to mention this is one of the ways we do research in nutrition, so we can just observe you. A lot of things we just go out and observe. So we look at populations and say, okay, if we look at these different populations, what type of different microbiota do they have? And then if they have different diseases, we can link that. Or we can intervene. And these are the kinds of studies that we typically like to do, where we put you on a diet and then probably takes about 2 weeks to change your microbiota totally over, and then we look at changes in that. And so we have seen some studies on that, and what you find is that you can change it, especially like with the, I'll just hold it, that's fine. That works great, thanks. In these interventions, we can change it pretty quickly, the microbiome, but as I mentioned, a lot of people do have different microbiomes, and you can only change it so much. I want to just give you one other example of some animal studies. And the reason I want to give you animal studies is a lot of studies in nutrition, we really do need to use animals because we need to find out more, and we want to put them on an extreme diet. I'm not going to put you guys on an extreme diet to answer a question. It's really not worth it to me, so I would prefer to use an animal if I want to give them a ton of fiber or a ton of probiotic and see what it does. We typically do animal studies. These are some real interesting animal studies. You want to put it there? Thanks. On bacterial diversity. So what you're going to find if you read in the literature, people are going to say people that live in Africa have a more diverse microbiota. Can we agree to that compared to a westernized diet? And for us to get a more diverse microbiota, we need to eat more variety of plant foods to get to that. So these are studies where what you do with these animals, and you can follow these through. And these are two leading researchers. Eric is at the University of Michigan, and you feed them reducing diversity by taking fiber out of their diet, and then do it generation after generation. So that's these types of studies which take a long time but really don't compare to a human study. So an animal's lifetime is much shorter. You can do a bigger intervention and get an answer to a question. And what you'll see here is in all these different generations, as you put them on a low fiber diet versus a high fiber diet will continue to give you more diversity, which most people would agree is a good thing. So the animal studies will support definitely more fiber in your diet will increase diversity, and most people believe diversity is an advantage. But even that, you'll get some disagreements on. So, a couple of conclusions here just to tally up here. Organisms living on and within food may be either your friends or your foes to the consumer. All of food safety, if there's bacteria in your food, you hear about it all the time. Different bacteria in your food cause disease. We got to get them out of there. We got to control that. So to say, are you friend or foe? And it's the same bacteria. It can be really good in a certain situation and the next place not be good at all. We believe things that decrease diversity are bad. So this is kind of what can we agree on right now. So antibiotics decreases diversity, wipes out your microorganisms. Probably a high-fat diet, a high-sugar diet that are lower in fiber. So fiber for sure, people agree is going to be a good thing. What happens if there's not enough diversity is there's not enough competition going on there, so things like pathogens, Clostridia, Staph aureus, E. coli, Listeria can invade and cause problems. Think of how hard this is to study, right? These bacteria are always around. We want to balance, and we want to keep the friendly ones in control. People think of it like a computer game. We got to get rid of the bad guys, but we don't even know who the bad guys are. There's like everybody has to get along. It's this society where everybody has to get along. So these organisms have a greater potential to colonize and then outcompete in these relationships. So the microbiota, if we could establish a healthy microbiota and keep it there, that is the goal. So keeping people on a high fiber diet throughout life would be good. All right. So I wanted to tell you that the ability to measure the microbiome is always increasing. So if you go back 20 years ago, what did we do? We collected your fecal samples, and then we had plates of where we would count colonies and look at that. So it was very tedious. Then some of the technology improved, and this is one of the problems in the whole literature base is methods are always changing. But right now you can go to these companies, and what you can do is send in a fecal sample, and they will come back and say this is your gut microbiome and compare you to other people. Usually, we were on the way over, it's like, well, what if I sent in a dog's, or what if I sent in somebody else's, or it wasn't mine? Typically what you're going to get back is they'll say, hey, this is your balance is pretty close to what's normal. We are going to recommend higher fiber diets. Or they might say you're too high. We're looking for more lactobacillus, more bifidobacteria. You might want to increase some of those prebiotic fibers or foods that are high in prebiotic fibers. You don't have to just go out and buy isolated fibers. You just need to eat more fruits and vegetables and whole grains to get there. Okay. I'm going to have some time for questions. I do want to point out that, as somebody that's been in fiber my whole life and collected more fecal samples, a lot of times I've had wonderful graduate students who have helped me in this endeavor. We've always known that the secrets are in the feces, like the secret to health, and everybody knows it. I was at a talk once and somebody said, it's weird over in where they were from in Japan, they said, we talk about pooping and farting and it's no big deal. We never talk about sex. And they said they come to the US and people, if they fart, it's like the biggest end of the deal and they get really upset and they talk about sex all the time. So what's the deal? And I think we have to get people more, what comes out is really important for health. What's going on within your gut is going to keep you healthy. Not that I'll tell you a little recent study we did too with just oatmeal in kids, trying to show that whole grain improves the number of bowel movements and the type of bowel movements. And so the kids that we studied were ages 7 to 12, and what they did with their cell phone is they took a picture of their poop and sent it to us. So we were looking at how much poop and was the poop healthier. And even that, they're kind of like, okay. The good thing was they got paid and they got their fiber intake up. And for a lot of them, getting just that extra fiber from a couple servings of oatmeal, whole grain oatmeal, improved their gut health. So we definitely need more studies on fiber and people more interested in kind of looking and learning from what comes out the other end. All right, a few summaries here. Microbiome research is an emerging area of science, and there are many research opportunities available. I hope that a few people that come to this thing tonight will say, hey, there are so many opportunities in nutrition research, especially gut health, and I can see lots of places where I can play a role. So whether you're a clinical study, a dietitian, a physician, a gastroenterologist, a big data person, a person that measures the microbiome when people send in their samples, a person that crunches data and comes up with what's the body of evidence, huge opportunities. Just in the food side, the food companies, everybody wants to improve gut health. So expertise in fiber, prebiotics, probiotics, really helpful. Maybe you just want to make beer. I mean, you can get by in that, right? That's a fermentation product, and someday drink beer and make beer. Same concept, same learning, fermentation part of the story there. The microbiome is integral to human physiology, maintenance of health, and the development of disease. Once people's microbiome is off, it's really hard to get it back. And this is when if you know people that have a gastrointestinal disease, a irritable bowel, Crohn's, once your gut isn't doing what it needs to do, healing it and getting it back on track is really difficult. So the goal is to keep people, regular meals, exercise, good health, so we can make sure that the microbiome stays healthy and not over-reliance on antibiotics. Two-sided relationship between diet and the microbiome. They've got to get along, right? That your diet determines your microbiome, and then your microbiome and what's going on in the gut determines your health. So it's just all this back and forth. And if you go on a really extreme diet and have problems, it's going to take a while to rebalance that situation. Being in the fiber world, I can't over-promote fiber. Fiber is a really important part of your diet. A lot of people just say, hey, I'm just going to take some supplements. I don't want to eat, I want pepperoni on my pizza. I'm not going to eat the vegetables. We know that plant foods have health benefits beyond their fiber content. So as you're hearing from people, eat more plant foods, increase plant food consumption in your diet, there's really good data, a good body of evidence that eating a variety of plant foods, and go back to the My Plate I showed you at the beginning, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, really important part of overall health. No disagreement on that. Prebiotics and probiotics are widely promoted but not accepted by regulatory agencies. What are they? And I mentioned part of the problem is they can be in a food, they can be in a supplement, and if they're a drug, then they're a drug. And they really, there are some drugs that are, but they have to be regulated as a drug. So it's this middle ground of dietary supplements that is a little bit risky because you're going to have to read and see what you're going to get. So obviously, I'm a dietitian. I'm always going the food route, try to get it in your food. And then if you do have a situation where you need some help on coming up with supplements of probiotics or prebiotics, talk to somebody that knows something so they can make sure you're getting active probiotics and prebiotic fibers that actually in the right composition and the right quantities. There's lots of developing links between changes in the microbiota and health outcomes. I just told you the excitement was, hey, if I change my microbiota, I can make these people skinny. How exciting is that? Most of the studies that have been done since then, it's not that easy. It'd be great if I could just shoot some prebiotic into you or probiotics and, hey, I change your microbiota, you lose 20 pounds, you love me, right? Kiss your dietitian. It never is that clear. There's no question, though, that this fermentation, there's some energy balance going on there, and it's worthy of looking at. If you send out to the companies that are out there and get a gut microbiota back, it's not as simple as a blood cholesterol. So, if you, like in the cardiovascular world, I can look at your total cholesterol, I can look at your LDL cholesterol, and I can say this is your risk of getting heart disease. I think you need to lower your cholesterol, or it's fine, don't worry about it. The microbiota is not there yet. We don't have an easy biomarker that, yep, you're healthy, nope, you're not. So as this field develops, I think those things will come. Where it'll be, we want your bifido to be at this high, this rate, this number, right? Lactobacillus should be at this number. Obviously Listeria, we don't want that at all. So as we work into microbiology, those of you that are out there, you can see all the opportunities for scientists here. Chemists, biologists, microbiologists, statisticians, big data people. So to get our hands around this big topic, it's going to take a lot of people in science. And before I came out here, let me just spend 1 minute on the importance of communication. So, you might say, I don't really like science that much, but I'm a really good communicator, I'm a really good writer. All of these things also need that. You always need that. So keep your balance. And we also talked about just the importance of theater and music and all the other skills as you're building your career. So even if you don't like your biology teacher, don't give up. There's a lot of future in science. So appreciate the opportunity to talk to you. And then if there's questions, I guess my boss is here.
Thank you, Joanne. Appreciate it. So we're going to take the questions from both aisles. So if you have got questions, raise your hand. And we have about 10 minutes for questions. You have to remember that I do need last 5 minutes, and I want all of us here to be Minnesota nice and don't start leaving the auditorium because we do need to thank some people. So we'll take the questions.
Did you say that you can't be sure that yogurt has live cultures in it?
That's, yogurt, the standards of identity for yogurt, you cannot be sure because if it had a heat treatment, but let me explain, I think if you guys heard the question, I think it was on the mic, that are we sure that all yogurt has live culture? We're not 100% sure of that, no. But what you find is there are some studies that show even dead culture can work in the gut. So there's quite a few studies showing you don't have to worry about that as much as people might think, that it still could have some health benefits.
Could you please make some recommendations for people about the connection between food allergies and the gut, and is there anything you would recommend?
Yeah, that's a great question on the food allergy world. I teach life cycle nutrition, and the concern is if you have food allergies in your family, should you avoid or should you expose? And the current thinking, on the peanut allergies is maybe you don't want to avoid, you want to expose more. People with full-blown peanut allergies, though, die from it, so it's very serious. So I think it's a really difficult topic, and I didn't bring up this topic, but I think I will now. Fecal transplants. So if you look, you think, what the heck is a fecal transplant? Is taking feces from healthy people and putting them into people that aren't healthy to help them get healthy. And so even on the allergy side, most people say the healthiest people that don't have allergies live in filth. You're thinking, well, what's that all about? Shouldn't we get rid of this exposure? But the current thinking is maybe we should go down the other path as far as food allergies and any type of allergies, that even though the allergies, like it's dust, all these things are our enemies, maybe if we get exposure earlier, then that is our friend. Even in breastfeeding, we're huge proponents of breastfeeding because you have less allergies, but there's certain children right from the get-go that have allergies. So because it is so serious, you really have to be concerned about it, and typically not, as a child, not exposed to those foods. But I think that the gut is a big, important part of it, so getting people to be more comfortable talking about gut physiology and eating a variety of foods will be helpful, I believe. And not limiting foods. I think this is the thing too.
If you get a cleansing for a colonoscopy, can it permanently change your biome, and how can we get it back?
Okay. I think there haven't been great studies of following a person along and looking at the same measurement of their gut microbiota and how do we ever get it back if it changes. There are some interesting studies that show that people tend to revert back to their standard. And this is typically true in a lot of nutrition studies, that people have a certain pattern. So if you had any type of GI surgery like that, probably the best thing is to get back on the best diet you can. But most people would say, rather than, there's a medical situation, that going out and buying your own probiotics and prebiotics and treating yourself is probably not a great idea. So I would say people like gastroenterologists, some of my friends that are GI dietitians could be helpful in coming up with a diet, because if people have anytime you eat something and it causes more harm in your gut, it's not your friend. So sometimes people with GI problems, fiber is the worst thing for them. So even though I've been pushing fiber, you guys are healthy, you're young, eat more fiber. Once you have any type of GI disease, certain fibers tend to not be very well tolerated. So I would probably go pretty slowly on that.
I don't know if you can speak to this, but I'm wondering if you know anything about mental health, trauma, anxiety, and gut health.
Absolutely. No, my students write a paper, and one of my students is writing a paper on that topic right now. So if you look at what affects your gut microbiota, absolutely everything does. And it's not well studied, but for sure stress has a huge effect on your gut physiology and your microbiota. So I think, just like obesity, as you get these interesting pilot studies and preliminary studies showing if we could get the gut microbiota in a healthy range, it could help us get to an ideal body weight, it could help mental health issues. And I do want to point out that the gut microbiome is everywhere right now, so it's probably a little over-promoted, but there's enough research to show that there's hope there, that getting people's gut healthy and their microbiome healthy could help on brain health, mental health.
I think we had a question right here.
I was wondering if you know what is the effect on gut with eating artificial like preservatives and coloring and so on.
Say it once more, I didn't quite get it.
I was interested, we were just looking at throughout Vaisara district schools, a lot of lunches include artificial preservatives, MSG, high fructose corn syrup, and how does that affect on kids?
Yeah, no, that's an interesting question. And if you guys heard the question about other things in the diet besides fiber, and I talked about some of the things that affect it. There's some really interesting animal studies on food additives, emulsifiers, for example, and showing big changes in the microbiota with large consumption in animals of these emulsifying agents that are used in a lot of processed foods. So there's a lot of interest in that for sure. The critics of those studies say, well, that was given in too much of a dose, that's not practical, so there's a lot of pushback from that, but I think people are saying, okay, alternative sweeteners, how does that affect the microbiome? A couple of recent studies out looking at aspartame and some of the alternative sweeteners, and most dietary exposure do affect the microbiota, and we just want to make sure that if it's shifting in a positive rather than a negative. And it kind of gets into this idea of diversity too, that we want a more diverse, the more competition there is, the healthier. It's like going out to the schoolyard. You don't want one bully taking over. Everybody needs to be there. So I think the diversity idea of the gut, keeping it as diverse as possible, a lot of acceptance in that area.
Any more questions from young scientists? Lonnie.
Okay.
Hello.
Hi.
So do you have any information about the data having relationship between microbiome and any metabolites in the body?
Yeah, no, I showed like one slide. There's a ton of information on that. The microbiota, it might not be them at all. It might be some of the metabolites in the cancer literature for sure, that those metabolites, something that's downstream pathway, those are the active ingredients, not the microbiota. They're just the worker bees. So shifting them is not, we're looking at that. But yeah, I didn't include any of that, but that's a very active research area and tons of work going on in that.
So with this, we are going to be concluding this formal presentation of Dr. Joanne Slavin, and then we'll have 5 minutes for recognizing few people. So before we go, I must admit that I had a little difficulty in scheduling April 16 speaker because there was a cancellation and no other speaker that was in line was available. So I did go to Joanne. I said, Joanne, can you help me? She said, tell me the topic and I'll be there. And that's why she's here. So thank her. Now, yeah, thank you. Please sit here for a few minutes. It is not yet 8 o'clock. This particular program started over 27 years ago. It was just an idea. It was just a concept. I shared idea with Lonnie, who is here, and she shared that with the school. And there were two other ladies, helped two of us. We are two just parent volunteers. We don't have any school position here. And one of them is Charlene Bargini. You have seen her every day. She is retiring from the school. So I want to thank her for her work, and I will tell you that if I would not have met Charlene, we would not have had Young Scientist Roundtable for this long. Charlene, please come up. Now, unfortunately, she has broken her ankle, so so the person who was backing up Charlene is Colleen Weir. She is also retiring from the school. So she is also here. So these two ladies are going to be retiring from the school. They will be still associated with the Young Scientist Roundtable. Okay, Colleen? I will request Lonnie to get one of the bouquets for Charlene.
You can't imagine what these women have done for the program and for you individually. When you see their name on all the information that you receive, they make sure you get all of these wonderful speakers and everything about them. Thank you so much.
So now, when these two ladies were retiring, I was thinking that, well, I don't know whether we should be continuing with this program. They said, no, you should continue. But I said, I want to make sure that the school is going to back us up. So yes, sure enough, the Vizata School District has said that we want to continue this program, we are going to help you, and we want to make sure this program continues in years to come. So there is one person now who is going to be joining us. Dave, you want to come up? Okay. So, school has assigned Deb Slomkowski to help us in organizing this particular program. Again, I'll be arranging the speakers, but I do need a lot of help to make sure that the entire event gets properly scheduled. So here is Deb. So you're also seeing here a few other volunteers. Dr. E, she works on our board. She herself is a scientist at Boston Scientific. She is a parent in Vizata school system. And there are a few other volunteers. I can't see them here. But again, it's a group of 12 people who run the program. But the person who controls it is now going to be Deb. We are going to be concluding this particular program. Thanks for your time here. I really wanted to do this, but it was so important to make sure that the people who have supported this program wholeheartedly are getting recognized. So that's the reason I wanted to take your time. So cookies are there. The second part, round two, will be there in the classroom. So remember that there's 8:10 for 30 minutes. There will be round two where the Joanne will be available if you have got additional questions. Otherwise, October 8 is Dr. Belick, Tornadoes. See you then.